The Miami sun beat down mercilessly as Margaret Reynolds stood at the imposing gates of the Sullivan estate. Her suitcase heavy with more than just clothes. 3 years of silence stretched between her and this place. 3 years since she'd watched them lower her sister's casket into the ground while a broken man and a silent child stood opposite her across the grave. "I promised Claire," she whispered, touching the locket at her throat. "I'm finally keeping my promise." The gates swung open with an electronic hum that matched the buzzing of anxiety in her chest. The driveway seemed endless, lined with royal palms that cast thin, inadequate shadows against the blinding white of the mansion ahead. This was Claire's dream home, the palace her sister had described in excited phone calls that Margaret had sometimes been too busy to answer. Now those missed calls haunted her. As the taxi pulled away, Margaret caught her reflection in the gleaming glass doors. Her auburn hair several shades darker than Claire's blonde. Her features similar enough to evoke recognition but different enough to be a constant reminder that she wasn't her sister. Never had been. Never could be. The door opened before she could knock, revealing Martin Sullivan, still handsome despite the exhaustion etched into his face. His once warm brown eyes now resembled the polished mahogany of his company's luxury yachts, beautiful but impenetrable. He'd aged more than 3 years should allow, silver threading prematurely through his dark hair at the temples. "You're late," he said, no warmth in the greeting. "The agency said you'd be here at noon." Margaret swallowed her instinctive retort. "My flight was delayed. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix much in this house," Martin replied, stepping aside to let her enter. The foyer opened into a soaring space of marble and glass, designed to showcase the ocean view beyond. It should have been breathtaking, but the stillness inside made it feel more like a mausoleum than a home. No toys scattered about, no music playing, no signs of the vibrant 6-year-old who should live here. "Where's Lily?" Margaret asked, setting down her bag. "Hiding, probably." Martin's voice held resignation rather than concern. "She does that with new nannies." "I'm not a nanny," Margaret corrected gently. "I'm her aunt." "You're whatever the agency paperwork says you are," he countered. "And it says, live-in childcare provider. The 7th this year, if you're keeping count." A small movement caught Margaret's eye, a flash of blonde hair quickly disappearing behind the curved staircase. Her heart clenched at the glimpse of her niece, so like Claire it hurt to look at her. "Hello, Lily," she called softly. "I'm your Aunt Margaret." No response came from the hiding spot, but Margaret hadn't expected one. The housekeeper, an older woman with kind eyes and a worried brow, had warned her on the phone. "The child hasn't spoken in 3 months, Miss Reynolds. Not since the last nanny left." Martin checked his watch, a gesture so reminiscent of Claire it made Margaret's chest ache. Her sister had always been checking the time, planning the next moment instead of living in the current one. "I have meetings until 7. Mrs. Alvarez will show you to your room and explain Lily's schedule." He turned to leave, then paused. "Don't expect miracles, Margaret. And don't expect to stay long. No one does." The coldness in his tone couldn't quite mask the pain beneath. This was a man who had given up, on connection, on healing, perhaps even on his daughter. "I'm not here for miracles, Martin," Margaret replied, straightening her shoulders. "I'm here because that little girl is the only piece of my sister left in this world. And unlike the others, I'm not leaving until Lily smiles again." Something flickered in Martin's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the first spark of challenge. "We'll see," was all he said before the heavy door closed behind him. From her hiding place, Lily peered out, her blue eyes, Claire's eyes, assessing Margaret with a wariness no 6-year-old should possess. When Margaret smiled, the child disappeared again, but not before Margaret caught the small worn doll clutched in her hands. Claire's doll. The one from their childhood that Claire had insisted on keeping for her own daughter someday. Margaret knelt down, speaking to the empty space where Lily had been. "I brought something for you," she said, opening her bag to remove a carefully wrapped package. "It's the other half of your mommy's favorite story." She placed the book, a well-loved copy of The Secret Garden, on the bottom step, then turned away to follow Mrs. Alvarez upstairs. She didn't look back, but she heard it. The whisper of small feet on marble, the gentle scrape of the book being picked up. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, Margaret knew from rebuilding her own life after heartbreak, were both the hardest and most important part of any story. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was how her arrival would awaken not just a silent child but also a man who had stopped living the day Claire died. Or how the promise she'd made to her sister would become the very thing that might force her to betray Claire's memory in the most unforgivable way. Because some promises once made change everything. And some hearts, once touched, refuse to remember what they're supposed to feel. Hello, my beautiful souls. Are your hearts fluttering yet? If Margaret and Martin's forbidden love story is making you feel all those sweet emotions, please tap that like button and subscribe to join our loving romance family. We share these heartwarming stories every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, and I would never want you to miss a single moment of these beautiful journeys. Turn on those notifications so we can continue walking this path of love together. Now, let's see if our star-crossed lovers can find their way to happiness despite all the obstacles between them. Margaret woke before dawn on her first full day at the Sullivan estate, the unfamiliar sounds of the ocean keeping her from deep sleep. Her room, a tastefully decorated guest suite that felt untouched by human presence, was directly across from what had been Claire's garden, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the first hint of sunrise. The garden was overgrown now, roses climbing wildly over trellises, herbs gone to seed, and weeds claiming territory once meticulously tended by her sister. Claire had never been a natural gardener. She approached plants with the same determined efficiency she applied to everything, but she'd loved the process of creating order from chaos. Looking at the abandoned space, Margaret felt a pang of recognition. This garden was Lily in physical form, neglected potential, beauty gone wild from lack of attention. After dressing in practical clothes, Margaret made her way downstairs, surprised to find Martin already at the kitchen island, reviewing documents while barely touching his coffee. "You're up early," she observed, pouring herself a cup from the carafe. Martin didn't look up. "I have a conference call with our Singapore office at 6. Does Lily usually sleep this late? Mrs. Alvarez gets her ready for school at 7:30. He gathered his papers, clearly intending to retreat to his home office. "There's a folder with her schedule and requirements on the counter." "Martin," Margaret said before he could escape, "I'd like to know more about Lily than what's in a folder. What is she like? What makes her happy?" Something like guilt flickered across his face. She used to like drawing. And the garden. Claire would take her out there every morning. He hesitated. "I don't know what makes her happy now." The admission hung between them, honest but devastating in its implications. "Maybe we could find out together," Margaret suggested gently. Martin's expression closed immediately. "That's why you're here. To figure out Lily. I have a company to run." After he left, Margaret explored the kitchen, finding it immaculately organized but strangely impersonal. No children's artwork on the refrigerator, no family photos, no evidence that a child lived here at all. She opened cabinets until she found pancake mix, determined to offer Lily something more welcoming than the approved breakfast options listed in the folder. When Mrs. Alvarez brought Lily downstairs, the child was already dressed in a pristine school uniform. Her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that made her look even more like a miniature version of Claire. "Good morning, Lily," Margaret smiled, flipping a pancake shaped like a butterfly. "I thought we might have something special for breakfast." Lily stared at the pancake, then at Margaret, her expression unreadable. She sat at the counter, hands folded in her lap, waiting with a patience no 6-year-old should possess. "Your mom loved butterfly pancakes," Margaret continued, placing one on Lily's plate. "She used to make them for me when I was sad." No response came, but Lily picked up her fork and took a small bite. It wasn't much, but Margaret counted it as progress. Mrs. Alvarez watched with cautious approval. "She hasn't eaten more than toast in weeks," she confided as she prepared Lily's lunch. Mr. Sullivan tries, but..." She trailed off, loyalty preventing further criticism. "How long have you worked for the family?" Margaret asked. "Since before Miss Lily was born. I was here when..." She glanced at Lily, lowering her voice. "The accident?" Margaret nodded, understanding the housekeeper's discretion. "And the other nannies?" Mrs. Alvarez's expression darkened. "None understood what this family needs. They tried to replace her mother instead of honoring her memory. The warning was clear: don't try to be Claire." As if Margaret could ever make that mistake. Her entire life had been defined by not being Claire, not as accomplished, not as disciplined, not as perfect. Even their parents had made the distinction clear, holding up Claire's achievements as the standard Margaret could never quite reach. After Lily left for school, Margaret found herself drawn to the neglected garden. Without conscious decision, she began pulling weeds, uncovering the structure Claire had created beneath the wilderness. Hours passed as she worked, the physical labor soothing her tangled emotions about being in her sister's home, sleeping across from her sister's garden, trying to reach her sister's child. "What are you doing?" Martin's voice startled her. He stood at the garden entrance, tie loosened and jacket discarded, looking more human than he had that morning. "Gardening," Margaret answered simply, wiping sweat from her forehead. It seemed like the right place to start. His eyes swept over the half-cleared beds. "Claire spent every free moment out here." "I know. She sent me pictures." Margaret hesitated. Lily might enjoy helping. Children usually like digging in dirt. "Lily hasn't set foot in this garden since Claire died." His voice was flat. "She watches it from her window, but she won't come out here." Margaret followed his gaze up to a second-floor window where a small face quickly disappeared from view. "She's watching now." "She watches everything," Martin said. "But she doesn't participate. Like father, like daughter," Margaret observed before she could stop herself. Martin's expression hardened. "You've been here less than 24 hours. Don't presume to understand my relationship with my daughter." "I understand absence," Margaret replied, standing her ground. "And Lily has lost enough already without losing her father too." For a moment, raw pain broke through Martin's carefully maintained facade. Then it was gone, replaced by the impenetrable mask he wore like armor. "I have a dinner meeting," he said, checking his watch, Claire's gesture again. "Don't wait up." That evening, Margaret ate alone with Lily, the massive dining table emphasizing the emptiness of the house. She deliberately chose a seat beside Lily rather than across from her, avoiding the head of the table where Martin would sit and the place to his right that had clearly been Claire's. "Is this okay?" she asked Lily, gesturing to her chosen seat. "I can move if you'd prefer." Lily said nothing, but her shoulders relaxed slightly, confirming Margaret's instinct. The child ate methodically, taking exactly 3 bites of each food before moving to the next, a pattern Margaret recognized from Claire's own careful eating habits. After dinner, Margaret followed Lily upstairs for her bedtime routine, noting how the child moved through each step with mechanical precision. Brush teeth for 2 minutes, wash face, change into pajamas, select 1 book. The bedroom was beautiful but sterile, decorated in pale blues and whites that seemed more appropriate for a magazine spread than a child's sanctuary. The only personal touches were a collection of framed photographs on the dresser, all featuring Claire and Lily in carefully posed portraits, and a stack of drawing paper on a small desk. "May I see your drawings?" Margaret asked as Lily climbed into bed. The child stiffened but didn't object as Margaret approached the desk. The top drawing showed dark, angry swirls of blue and black, waves crashing against jagged rocks. The next was similar, and the next. All variations on the same stormy seascape, all expressing a turmoil the child couldn't verbalize. Margaret's heart ached at the obvious connection to Claire's boating accident. She returned to Lily's bedside with the book the child had selected, a picture book about a lighthouse keeper, and began to read. Halfway through, she noticed Lily's eyes growing heavy. "Your mom used to fall asleep during stories too," Margaret said softly. She never wanted to admit she was tired. Lily's eyes opened at the mention of her mother, a flicker of interest breaking through her carefully maintained blankness. "Would you like me to tell you a story about her instead?" Margaret offered. A barely perceptible nod was her answer. "When your mom was just a little older than you, she decided our backyard needed a pond," Margaret began, smiling at the memory. "Not a little one, a big one with fish and water lilies. She dug for 3 days straight in the hot sun until she hit a water pipe." As she spoke, Lily's eyes remained fixed on her face, drinking in every detail about the mother she was forgetting a little more each day. When the story ended, Margaret kissed her forehead gently. "Good night, Lily. I'll tell you another story tomorrow if you'd like." Later that night, Margaret's phone rang, her parents' number flashing on the screen. She'd been expecting this call since she'd emailed them about taking the position with Martin. "What are you thinking, Margaret?" her mother demanded without preamble. "Working for that man after what he did to Claire?" "Martin didn't cause the accident, Mom," Margaret replied, keeping her voice low to avoid being overheard. "The investigation cleared him completely. He pushed her to go out that day." Her father's voice joined in. They were on speakerphone. "You know how Claire was. Always trying to please him, always pushing herself too hard." The familiar argument exhausted Margaret. For 3 years, her parents had channeled their grief into blame, making Martin the villain in a tragedy that had no villains, only victims. "I'm here for Lily," she said firmly. "She needs family." "Then bring her home to us," her mother insisted. "Where she belongs. This is her home. Her father is here." "That man is no father," her father scoffed. "Claire would be horrified to see how he's raising her daughter." Margaret closed her eyes, fighting for patience. "I need to go. I'll call you in a few days when you're calmer. Margaret Reynolds, if you don't come home immediately, you're choosing him over your own family," her mother threatened. "I'm choosing Lily," Margaret corrected before ending the call. She sat in the darkness of her room afterward, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake coming here. The house felt haunted, not by Claire's ghost but by the absence of her presence, by the frozen grief that had preserved everything exactly as it had been the day she died. A soft knock at her door startled her. Opening it, she found no one in the hallway, but on the floor lay a piece of paper, a drawing. Unlike the stormy seascapes, this one showed a garden with bright flowers and a small figure with red-brown hair holding a trowel. In the window above, a tiny blonde girl watched. It was crude and childlike, but unmistakable. Lily had drawn Margaret in Claire's garden, with herself observing from above. Margaret clutched the drawing to her chest, tears filling her eyes. It wasn't much, not a word, not a smile, but it was acknowledgement. A tiny crack in the wall Lily had built around herself. Beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret established a routine that gradually breathed life back into the Sullivan home. Mornings began with special breakfasts, butterfly pancakes on Mondays, rainbow fruit parfaits on Tuesdays. Small touches that gave Lily something to anticipate rather than just endure. After school, they spent time in Claire's garden, Margaret working while Lily observed from a safe distance, never entering but gradually moving closer to the stone path that bordered the space. Margaret filled these sessions with stories about Claire as a child, carefully selected memories that painted her sister as human rather than the saint everyone else had made her into. "Your mom once put salt instead of sugar in a cake she was making for Grandma's birthday," Margaret shared as she pruned an overgrown rose bush. She was so determined to fix it that she stayed up all night baking a new one. These glimpses of Claire's imperfections seemed to comfort Lily more than tales of her perfection. Margaret understood why. Perfection was impossible to live up to, but a mother who made mistakes was someone a daughter could hope to become. The garden slowly transformed under Margaret's care, and with it, subtle changes appeared in the household. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining table. Windows previously kept shuttered were opened to admit sunlight. Lily's drawings, while still predominantly seascapes, occasionally included flowers or butterflies at the edges. Most surprising was Martin's gradual shift in patterns. His late meetings became less frequent. He began arriving home before Lily's bedtime, hovering at the edges of their interactions like a cautious observer studying an unfamiliar species. One evening, Margaret looked up from helping Lily with a simple puzzle to find Martin watching them from the doorway, an unreadable expression on his face. "Would you like to join us?" she offered, gesturing to the empty space at the coffee table. Martin hesitated, then lowered himself to the floor with the careful movements of someone who had forgotten how to play. "What are we building?" "A lighthouse," Lily answered in her small, rarely used voice. The shock on Martin's face at hearing his daughter speak was quickly masked, but Margaret caught it, along with the flash of pain that followed. How long had it been since he'd heard her voice directed at him? "Lighthouses are important," he said, selecting a puzzle piece. "They help ships find their way home safely." Lily nodded, accepting the piece he offered and fitting it precisely into place. They worked in silence after that, but it was a different quality of silence than before. Not the absence of communication, but the presence of something too fragile to risk with words. That night, Margaret was awakened by a scream. She rushed across the hall to find Lily thrashing in her bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare. Without hesitation, Margaret gathered the child into her arms, rocking her gently. "Shoo, sweetheart, you're safe." "I'm here," she murmured, stroking Lily's hair as the child clung to her. "The storm can't hurt you." Gradually, Lily's sobs subsided, her small body growing heavy with exhaustion. Margaret continued holding her, unwilling to break the connection that had formed in this vulnerable moment. Eventually, her own eyes grew heavy, and she drifted to sleep with Lily nestled against her. She didn't know how much time had passed when she sensed another presence in the room. Opening her eyes, she found Martin standing beside the bed, watching them with an expression that made her heart constrict. Longing and loss and something else she couldn't name. "She had a nightmare," Margaret whispered, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. Martin nodded. "She has them often. About the water. Have you ever?" Margaret hesitated, then continued gently. "Held her through them?" A shadow crossed his face. "I tried in the beginning. She would scream louder when I touched her." The admission hung between them, raw with pain. "She was on the boat," Martin continued, his voice barely audible. "When it happened, she saw everything." Margaret's arms tightened protectively around Lily. She hadn't known this detail, that the child had witnessed her mother's death. No wonder the ocean haunted her dreams. "Martin," she began, but he shook his head, unwilling to continue the conversation. "You should get some rest," he said, retreating toward the door. But he paused there, looking back at them. "Thank you," he added, the words clearly difficult for him. She hasn't slept peacefully in a long time. The next morning, Margaret discovered a small wooden box while organizing Lily's bookshelf. For Lily, written on top in Claire's distinctive handwriting. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each dated and sealed. "Mrs. Alvarez," Margaret asked, finding the housekeeper in the kitchen. "Do you know about these?" The older woman nodded. "Miss Claire wrote them when she was pregnant. One for each birthday, special occasions, milestones. She said every girl needs her mother's wisdom, even if..." She trailed off, eyes glistening. "Even if she couldn't be there to give it in person," Margaret finished softly. That evening, after Lily's bath, Margaret showed her the box. "These are special letters from your mom," she explained. "Would you like me to read one to you?" Lily's eyes widened as she touched the envelopes reverently. She selected one labeled, "When You Feel Alone," and handed it to Margaret. The letter inside was pure Claire, practical, loving, and forward-thinking. She wrote about the importance of reaching out when feeling isolated, about how strength sometimes meant asking for help, about how she would always be with Lily even when they couldn't see each other. "And remember, my sweet girl," Claire had written, "you are never truly alone. There are people who love you, even when you can't feel it, like stars hidden behind clouds, still shining, still there." By the letter's end, tears streamed down Margaret's face. Across from her, Lily sat perfectly still, absorbing her mother's words with solemn intensity. "Would you like to read another tomorrow night?" Margaret asked, carefully refolding the letter. Lily nodded, then did something unexpected. She leaned forward and wiped a tear from Margaret's cheek, a gesture of comfort that nearly undid her completely. 3 days later, Miami's unpredictable weather brought a violent thunderstorm that knocked out power throughout the neighborhood. Martin arrived home to find the house illuminated by candles, Margaret and Lily constructing a fort from blankets in the living room. "The electricity company says it could be hours," Margaret explained, looking up from her architectural efforts. "We decided to make an adventure of it." Martin stood awkwardly at the edge of their circle of light, briefcase still in hand, clearly uncertain of his place in this tableau of domestic coziness. "We need someone tall," Lily said quietly, holding out the corner of a blanket that kept slipping from its anchor point. The simple request, the first words his daughter had directly addressed to him in months, transformed Martin's expression. He set down his briefcase and removed his suit jacket with deliberate movements, as if afraid sudden motion might shatter the moment. "I think I can help with that," he said, taking the blanket from her small hand. Together, they created a surprisingly sturdy structure, Martin's practical engineering mind complementing Margaret's creative vision. When it was complete, they crawled inside with flashlights and the picnic dinner Margaret had assembled from refrigerator contents that wouldn't last without power. "This reminds me of camping in the Everglades," Martin said as they ate sandwiches by flashlight. "Claire hated every minute of it." Margaret laughed, surprised. "Claire went camping. Voluntarily." "Not exactly voluntarily," Martin admitted, a genuine smile softening his features. "It was our third date. I was trying to impress her with my outdoorsman skills." "Which were clearly extensive," Margaret teased, gesturing to their blanket fort. "I may have exaggerated my experience slightly," he confessed. "We ended up with a flooded tent and had to sleep in the car." "And she still married you?" Margaret marveled. "My sister, who needed her moisturizer arranged by skin zone. She said it was the first time she'd seen me fail at something," Martin recalled, his voice softening with memory. "She liked that I wasn't perfect." The candlelight cast warm shadows across his face, revealing glimpses of the man Claire had fallen in love with, the man hidden beneath layers of grief and guilt. Margaret found herself studying him with new eyes, seeing beyond the stern CEO to someone capable of vulnerability, of self-deprecating humor. It was unsettling. As the evening progressed, Lily fell asleep between them, her small body finally relaxed in her father's presence. Martin watched her with a mixture of wonder and sadness. "I've missed so much," he said quietly. "I thought staying busy would help her, show her how to be strong. Instead, I just left her alone with her grief." "You were grieving too," Margaret reminded him gently. "That's no excuse." "No," she agreed. "But it's a reason. And understanding reasons is the first step toward forgiveness, including forgiving yourself." Their eyes met across Lily's sleeping form, connection sparking between them in the intimate darkness. When Martin reached for another candle as one guttered out, their hands brushed, a momentary touch that sent an unexpected current through Margaret's body. She pulled back as if burned, guilt flooding her immediately. This was her sister's husband, the father of her niece, the man Claire had loved enough to marry, to have a child with, to build a life around. Martin seemed equally disturbed by the moment, his expression shuddering as he carefully moved Lily to a more comfortable position. "I should get her to bed," he said, gathering his daughter into his arms with a tenderness that made Margaret's chest ache. Left alone in the fort, Margaret extinguished the remaining candles, plunging the room into darkness that matched her confused emotions. The following afternoon, Margaret met Martin Sullivan for coffee at his suggestion. Martin's younger brother had been overseas when she arrived and had reached out immediately upon his return, curious about the sister-in-law who had suddenly appeared in his brother's life. "So you're the miracle worker," Marcus said after introductions, studying her with eyes the same shade as Martin's but warmer, more accessible. "The woman who got my niece talking and my brother remembering he has a home." Margaret flushed. "I wouldn't go that far. Mrs. Alvarez would. She called me last week, practically in tears because Lily asked for pancakes. Marcus leaned forward. "Do you know how long we've been worried about those two?" Martin buried himself in work. Lily retreated into silence, and none of us could reach either of them. "They're grieving," Margaret said simply. "Everyone does it differently." "And how did you grieve Claire?" Marcus asked, his directness catching her off guard. Margaret considered the question. "Imperfectly," she finally answered. "With guilt mostly. We weren't as close as we should have been. I was always the disappointing sister, the one who changed careers 3 times, who dated the wrong men, who couldn't commit to a 5-year plan." "You sound nothing like Claire," Marcus observed. "That was rather the point, according to our parents." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And yet you're the one who's reaching Lily when no one else could. Maybe what she needs isn't another Claire, but someone completely different." The insight struck Margaret with unexpected force. Perhaps her perceived failings, her spontaneity, her emotional openness, her comfort with imperfection, were exactly what this household of carefully controlled grief needed. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus said, interrupting her thoughts. "You can ask. What's happening between you and my brother?" Margaret nearly choked on her coffee. "Nothing is happening. I'm there for Lily." Marcus hummed skeptically. "And that's why Mrs. Alvarez mentioned you two building blanket forts by candlelight." "There was a power outage," Margaret protested. "We were entertaining a child." "Martin hasn't entertained anyone since Claire died," Marcus pointed out. "He's been existing, not living. Until recently." "I'm her sister," Margaret said firmly, as much to herself as to Marcus. "I know." His expression softened. "Which is why I'm concerned. This situation is complicated enough without adding feelings to the mix." "There are no feelings," Margaret insisted, ignoring the memory of that brief touch, the current that had passed between them. Marcus studied her for a long moment. "Just be careful," he finally said. "Martin is finally starting to heal. Lily is speaking again. Whatever happens next will affect both of them profoundly." His warning followed Margaret home, echoing in her mind as she packed an overnight bag. She'd promised to check on her apartment, water her plants, collect mail that had accumulated in her absence. "I'll be back tomorrow afternoon," she assured Lily as the child watched her preparations with increasing anxiety. "Mrs. Alvarez will be here, and your dad will be home for dinner." Lily's lower lip trembled slightly. "What if you don't come back?" The question, the most words Lily had strung together since Margaret's arrival, pierced her heart. "Oh, sweetheart, of course I'll come back. The other nannies said that too." Margaret knelt to Lily's level, meeting her eyes directly. "I'm not the other nannies. I'm your aunt. We're family, and family doesn't disappear." Lily considered this, her small face serious. "Promise." "I promise," Margaret said firmly. "I'll always come back to you." Lily studied her for a long moment, then spoke a single word that changed everything. "Stay." Can you imagine falling for someone who's completely off limits? Someone who represents both your greatest comfort and deepest guilt? If this story is touching your heart, give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you choose family loyalty or follow your heart? Let us know as we continue this emotional journey of forbidden love and healing. Margaret cancelled her apartment visit, unable to deny Lily's simple plea. That single word, "stay," had unlocked something in the child, who began speaking more frequently in the days that followed. Not in long sentences or elaborate stories, but in small, significant ways that revealed her observant nature. "You smile different than Mommy," Lily noted one morning as Margaret braided her hair for school. "Different how?" Margaret asked, curious about the comparison. Lily considered this seriously. "Bigger. With your eyes too." The observation was startlingly perceptive. Claire's smile had always been perfect but contained, as if she were carefully measuring how much joy to display. Margaret had never learned that restraint, her emotions always visible on her face. Your daddy has a nice smile too, Margaret said carefully. When he lets it show. He didn't smile before, Lily replied matter-of-factly. Now he does sometimes, when he looks at you. The innocent comment sent heat rushing to Margaret's cheeks. Before she could formulate a response, the doorbell rang, an unusual occurrence in a household where visitors were rare and typically announced in advance. Mrs. Alvarez appeared in the doorway, her expression tense. Miss Margaret, your parents are here. Margaret's stomach dropped. My parents. They didn't tell me they were coming. They're in the foyer, Mrs. Alvarez confirmed. Shall I show them to the sitting room? Yes, please. Margaret finished Lily's braid quickly. Sweetheart, those are your grandparents downstairs. Would you like to meet them? Lily's face closed immediately, wariness replacing her earlier openness. Do I have to? The question revealed more than Lily probably intended, that she'd overheard adult conversations, that she understood these grandparents were somehow different from the warm relationship Martin's parents had apparently shared with her. Not if you don't want to, Margaret assured her. You can go to school with Mrs. Alvarez, and I'll see you this afternoon. Relief washed over Lily's face as she nodded, gathering her backpack and following Mrs. Alvarez downstairs via the back staircase. Margaret took a deep breath before descending to the formal sitting room, where she found her parents examining the space with critical eyes. Eleanor Reynolds, still elegant at 62, ran a finger along a side table as if checking for dust, while Richard stood before the family photographs on the mantel, his expression disapproving. Mom, Dad, Margaret greeted them, accepting her mother's perfunctory cheek kiss. This is a surprise. Clearly, Eleanor replied, taking in Margaret's casual attire. You weren't answering our calls. I've been busy, Margaret said, gesturing for them to sit. Lily is making progress. She's speaking again. That's why we're here, Richard stated, remaining standing. We've given you time to come to your senses, but enough is enough. You need to come home. I am home, Margaret replied, the certainty in her voice surprising even herself. At least for now. Lily needs me. What Lily needs is to be with her real family, Eleanor insisted. Not with the man who's responsible for her mother's death. Martin is her father, Margaret reminded them firmly. And he was cleared of any responsibility for the accident. Convenient findings when you own half the coastline, Richard scoffed. We all know he pressured Claire to take that boat out despite the weather warnings. You don't know anything about their relationship, Margaret countered, frustration building. Or what happened that day. And you do, Eleanor challenged. You who barely spoke to your sister in the years before her death? The barb struck its target, but Margaret refused to show the pain it caused. I'm getting to know Claire better now, through her daughter and her home, than I ever did when she was alive. And that's on all of us, not just me. Before her parents could respond, the front door opened, and Martin's voice carried from the foyer as he spoke on his phone. He appeared in the doorway moments later, stopping abruptly at the sight of the Reynolds. I'll call you back, he said into the phone before ending the call. Richard, Eleanor. This is unexpected. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Richard stepped forward, his posture aggressive. We've come for our granddaughter. Martin's expression hardened. Lily is at school where she should be, and she lives here with me. For now, Eleanor said coldly. But we're exploring other options. What does that mean? Margaret demanded. It means we've consulted an attorney, Richard stated, about seeking custody of Lily. The shock of this announcement rendered Margaret momentarily speechless. Martin, however, maintained his composure, though she could see the tension in his jaw. On what grounds? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. Emotional neglect, Eleanor supplied. Psychological damage. The child hasn't spoken in months, according to reports from her school. She's failing to thrive in your care. Reports, Margaret repeated. You've been spying on them. We've been concerned, Richard corrected. With good reason, apparently. The school counselor has documented significant regression since Claire's death. Lily is speaking now, Margaret informed them. She's making progress every day. Thanks to you, Eleanor pointed out. Not him. Which only proves our point. She needs family who can provide emotional support, not a workaholic who leaves her with a parade of nannies. Martin's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. I think it's time for you to leave. Any further communication can go through my attorneys. We're not leaving without Margaret, Richard insisted. I'm staying, Margaret said firmly. Lily asked me to. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You would choose them over your own family. Over Claire's memory. I'm honoring Claire's memory by helping her daughter, Margaret replied. And Martin is Lily's family, her primary family. The sooner you accept that, the better for everyone, especially Lily. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if Mrs. Alvarez hadn't appeared to announce lunch was ready, a polite but clear suggestion that this visit had reached its natural conclusion. After her parents departed with icy goodbyes and thinly veiled threats of legal action, Margaret found Martin in his study, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke with his lawyer. When he ended the call, the weariness in his expression made her heart ache. I'm so sorry, she said. I had no idea they were planning this. Martin shook his head. It's not your fault. They've been looking for an excuse to take Lily since the accident. They're grieving, Margaret offered, though the explanation felt inadequate even to her. They lost their perfect daughter, and they need someone to blame. And I'm the convenient target, Martin concluded. The husband who couldn't protect his wife. The self-recrimination in his voice made Margaret cross the room without thinking, placing her hand over his. Claire's accident wasn't your fault, wasn't it? His eyes met hers, haunted by old guilt. I was the one who suggested she take the boat out that day. I knew she wasn't an experienced sailor, but she wanted to prove she could handle it alone. That was Claire, Margaret said softly. Always needing to prove herself to be perfect at everything. She made her own choices. Martin turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting in a gesture that felt startlingly intimate. Thank you, he said quietly, for defending me to your parents. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Margaret replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his hand against hers. They're wrong about you. Something shifted in Martin's expression. A softening, a vulnerability that made him look younger, more like the man Claire must have fallen in love with. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before he seemed to catch himself, stepping back and breaking the connection. I should get back to work, he said, his voice rougher than before. And you probably have plans with Lily after school. The moment passed, but its echo lingered between them, a possibility neither was ready to acknowledge. 2 days later, Martin surprised them both by suggesting a weekend sailing trip on his smaller yacht. Just around the bay, he clarified, watching their reactions carefully. Nothing ambitious. Lily's eyes widened, fear and longing battling in her expression. On the water. Yes, Martin knelt to her level. But only if you want to, sweetheart. And I'll be with you the whole time. Margaret held her breath, understanding the significance of this invitation, the first time either had ventured onto the water since the accident that took Claire. Will Margaret come too? Lily asked, her small hand finding Margaret's. Of course, Martin assured her, his eyes meeting Margaret's over their daughter's head. If she wants to. I'd love to, Margaret said, squeezing Lily's hand encouragingly. The day dawned clear and calm, perfect for sailing. Margaret watched as Martin patiently showed Lily each safety feature of the boat, explaining how everything worked with a serious attention he might give a business presentation. His careful thoroughness was clearly for Lily's benefit, a father addressing his daughter's unspoken fears. And this, he said, helping Lily into a child-sized life vest, is the most important part. You don't go near the water without it. Ever. Lily nodded solemnly, allowing him to adjust the straps. Did Mommy wear hers? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Martin's hand stilled momentarily before he continued securing the vest. "Yes," he said finally. "But sometimes accidents happen even when we do everything right." It wasn't a complete answer, Margaret noted, but it was honest in its way. She wondered, not for the first time, about the details of Claire's accident that had never been fully explained to her. Once they were underway, Lily's initial tension gradually gave way to cautious enjoyment. Martin proved to be a skilled sailor, his confidence on the water reassuring to both his passengers. By midday, Lily was laughing as dolphins played in their wake, her fear temporarily forgotten in the magic of the moment. Margaret captured the scene with her phone, Lily's face alight with joy, Martin beside her with an expression of wonder, as if seeing his daughter truly happy for the first time in years. "Thank you for suggesting this," Margaret said when Lily went below deck for a snack. "It's exactly what she needed." "What we all needed," Martin corrected, his gaze lingering on her face. "I've been hiding from the water, from memories, from everything that reminded me of that day." It wasn't fair to Lily. "You were protecting yourself," Margaret observed. "We all do it in different ways." "How do you protect yourself, Margaret?" he asked, the question more personal than any he'd posed before. She considered this, watching the Miami skyline glitter in the distance. "I keep moving," she admitted. "New jobs, new apartments, new beginnings. If you don't stay in one place too long, you don't have to face what you're running from." "And what are you running from?" "Disappointment mostly," she said with a small smile. "My own and others. I was never quite what anyone wanted me to be." "I find that hard to believe," Martin said quietly. Before she could respond, Lily reappeared, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. But something had changed between them, a deeper understanding, a recognition of shared vulnerability that made Margaret both hopeful and uneasy. The following week brought an unexpected crisis when Martin's Singapore office reported serious irregularities in their financial reporting, potentially indicating fraud. The situation required his immediate attention and travel. "It's just for 3 days," he explained apologetically. "But it's Lily's school art exhibition tomorrow night. All the parents are expected to attend." "I can take her," Margaret offered immediately. Relief and something else, trust perhaps, washed over Martin's face. "Would you? It's important to her. She's been working on her project for weeks." "Of course. We'll be fine." The art exhibition was held in the school's expansive atrium, transformed for the evening into a gallery showcasing work from students of all grades. Lily, dressed in a blue dress that brought out her eyes, led Margaret proudly to her display, a series of watercolors showing the progression of Claire's garden from neglected to restored. "This is beautiful, Lily," Margaret said, genuinely impressed by the child's talent. "Your mom would be so proud. Do you think Daddy will like it?" Lily asked anxiously. "He'll love it," Margaret assured her. "We'll take pictures to show him when he gets home." As they moved through the exhibition, Margaret became aware of curious glances from other parents. Eventually, a well-dressed woman approached them, her smile polished to perfection. "You must be Lily's mother," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Jennifer Whitman, PTA president. We've been hoping to meet you." Before Margaret could correct her, Lily spoke up. "This is my Aunt Margaret. My mommy died." The blunt statement, delivered in Lily's matter-of-fact tone, created an awkward pause. "I'm so sorry," Jennifer fumbled. "I didn't realize. We'd heard Mr. Sullivan had remarried, and naturally assumed." "You heard wrong," Margaret said gently, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "I'm Claire's sister. I'm helping out while Martin is traveling." "How nice," Jennifer managed, clearly recalibrating her assessment. "Well, we're always looking for parent volunteers. Or aunt volunteers in your case." As the woman moved away, Margaret knelt to check on Lily. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lily nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. "People think you're my new mommy." The observation was delivered without judgment, but it sent a wave of guilt through Margaret nonetheless. Does that bother you? Lily considered this with her characteristic seriousness. No, she decided finally. But you're not my mommy. You're my Margaret. The simple claim, my Margaret, touched her deeply. That's right, she agreed. And you're my Lily. Later that evening, as Margaret tucked Lily into bed, the child asked a question that caught her completely off guard. Do you love my daddy? Margaret's heart stuttered. I care about your daddy very much, she answered carefully. He's family. Lily's eyes, so like Claire's, studied her with unnerving perception. Not like that, she clarified. Like in my books. The princess kind. Oh, Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. That's complicated, sweetheart. Because of mommy. Yes, Margaret admitted, seeing no point in lying to this perceptive child. Because of mommy. Lily nodded, accepting this answer. Mommy would want daddy to be happy, she said with the simple certainty of childhood. She told me so in her letter. Before Margaret could ask what letter she meant, Lily's eyes were closing, exhaustion claiming her. Margaret sat beside her bed long after she fell asleep, troubled by the conversation and its implications. The following afternoon, Margaret was working in the garden when a shadow fell across the flowers. Looking up, she expected to see Martin, returned early from his trip. Instead, she found herself facing Vanessa Hughes, Claire's closest friend and confidant. So it's true, Vanessa said without preamble. You've moved in. Margaret stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Hello, Vanessa. Yes, I'm staying here to help with Lily. Is that what you're calling it? Vanessa's tone was sharp with accusation. Because from what I hear, you're playing house pretty convincingly. Taking Lily to school functions, restoring Claire's garden, making yourself indispensable to Martin. I'm doing what Claire would have wanted, Margaret defended. Helping her family heal. By replacing her. Vanessa challenged. I saw you at the art exhibition. Everyone's talking about how Martin Sullivan's sister-in-law has seamlessly stepped into his dead wife's shoes. The accusation stung precisely because it touched on Margaret's deepest fear, that in helping this family, she was somehow erasing her sister's memory. I'm not replacing Claire, she said firmly. No one could. But you'd like to, Vanessa pressed. I see the way you look at him, Margaret. Don't think I don't recognize it. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Vanessa stepped closer. Claire was my best friend. She told me everything, including how you always envied her life, her success, her perfect marriage. That's not true, Margaret protested, though a small voice inside whispered that perhaps there was some truth to it. Not envy of Claire's specific life, but of her certainty, her ability to create the existence she wanted through sheer determination. Isn't it? Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Then tell me you haven't thought about it, about how easy it would be to slide into Claire's place. The devoted wife, the loving mother, the life you never managed to build for yourself. Before Margaret could respond, a deeper voice interrupted from the garden entrance. That's enough, Vanessa. Martin stood there, his expression thunderous, travel bag still in hand. He must have come directly from the airport to have arrived home early. Vanessa had the grace to look momentarily abashed before rallying. Someone needs to say it, Martin. Claire hasn't been gone 3 years, and already you're. Already I'm what? He challenged, stepping into the garden. Trying to help my daughter heal. Allowing someone who cares about her to be part of her life. What exactly are you accusing me of? The direct confrontation seemed to deflate Vanessa's righteous anger. I just don't want Claire to be forgotten, she said, her voice smaller. No one is forgetting Claire, Martin said, his tone gentler. Least of all Margaret, who has been reading Claire's letters to Lily, telling her stories about her mother, keeping her memory alive in ways I couldn't. Vanessa looked between them, something like resignation crossing her face. I should go, she said finally. I'm sorry if I overstepped. After she left, an awkward silence fell between Margaret and Martin. The accusations hung in the air, impossible to unhear. I'm sorry about that, Martin said eventually. Vanessa has appointed herself Claire's defender. She means well. She's not entirely wrong, Margaret admitted, unable to meet his eyes. People are talking. About us. About me taking Claire's place. Let them talk, Martin said dismissively. We know the truth. But what was the truth? Margaret wasn't sure anymore. She had come here for Lily, with no intention beyond helping her niece heal. Yet somewhere along the way, her feelings had become hopelessly tangled. Affection for Martin blending with guilt about Claire, desire for a family conflicting with loyalty to her sister's memory. How was Singapore? She asked, desperate to change the subject. Resolved for now, he replied, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. I missed Lily's exhibition. She understood. We took pictures. Margaret reached for her phone, grateful for the distraction. Her watercolors are amazing. She painted the garden. As she scrolled through the photos, Martin moved closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he looked at the screen. The casual contact sent warmth spreading through her body, a reaction she couldn't control or deny. She's talented, Martin observed, his voice low. Like her mother. Like you too, Margaret corrected. Claire couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler. This comes from your side. He laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed his face. In that moment, with the setting sun casting golden light across the garden Claire had created, Margaret felt something inside her surrender to the truth she'd been fighting for weeks. She was falling in love with her sister's husband. The realization must have shown on her face, because Martin's laughter faded, replaced by an expression of such naked longing that it took her breath away. Margaret, he said, her name a question and a plea. She should step back. She should remember Claire, remember her parents' accusations, remember Vanessa's warnings. She should think of Lily and the confusion this would cause. Instead, she remained perfectly still as Martin's hand came up to touch her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip with exquisite gentleness. Tell me to stop, he whispered, giving her one last chance to preserve the boundaries between them. She couldn't. Not when every cell in her body was drawing her toward him. Not when his eyes held promises of healing and hope and possibilities she'd never dared imagine. When his lips finally met hers, the kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. But as her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm, the kiss deepened into something urgent and necessary, as if they were both drowning and had finally found air. It was Martin who pulled away first, resting his forehead against hers as they both struggled to breathe normally. I shouldn't have done that, he said, though his hands still framed her face with impossible tenderness. We shouldn't have, Margaret agreed, making no move to increase the distance between them. Reality crashed back slowly. The garden they stood in was Claire's creation. The ring Martin still wore on his left hand was Claire's claim. The child sleeping upstairs was Claire's daughter. Claire, Claire, Claire. Her sister's presence surrounded them, a silent witness to their betrayal. Margaret stepped back abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself as if suddenly cold despite the warm evening. This is wrong, she whispered. We can't. Martin's expression shifted from desire to understanding to resignation. I know, he acknowledged. But it doesn't feel wrong. That was the problem. It had felt perfectly right, as if they were continuing something rather than beginning it. As if some part of her had been waiting for this moment since she first stepped into this house. I should go, Margaret said, the decision crystallizing even as she spoke it. Lily is doing better. She's speaking, engaging at school. She doesn't need me anymore. I need you, Martin said quietly, the admission clearly costing him. Margaret closed her eyes against the pain those words caused. No, you don't. You're healing too. You'll be fine. And us? He asked. What about what's happening between us? There is no us, Margaret forced herself to say. There can't be. Not without betraying Claire, betraying Lily, betraying everything. She turned away before he could see the tears gathering in her eyes, hurrying into the house and up to her room. With shaking hands, she began pulling clothes from drawers, stuffing them haphazardly into her suitcase. This was the right decision, the only decision. She had come to help Lily heal, and she had. Staying now, with these feelings growing between her and Martin, would only lead to more pain, more complications, more betrayal of Claire's memory. By midnight, her bags were packed. She wrote 2 notes, one for Martin, explaining her decision and asking him not to contact her, and a gentler one for Lily, promising to call and visit but explaining that she needed to return to her own home. As she placed Lily's note on the child's bedside table, watching her sleep peacefully, Margaret fought back a fresh wave of tears. Leaving would hurt Lily, she knew that. But staying would ultimately hurt her more, creating confusion and eventually resentment when she realized her aunt had taken her mother's place. Better a clean break now than a messy, painful entanglement that would damage them all. With one last look at the sleeping child, Margaret slipped from the room and down the stairs, leaving her keys and notes on the entry table. Outside, her rideshare waited to take her to a hotel for the night. As the car pulled away from the Sullivan estate, Margaret didn't allow herself to look back. Looking back meant acknowledging what she was leaving behind. Not just Lily and Martin, but the possibility of a family, a home, a love she hadn't been looking for but had found nonetheless. A love that could never be hers. Margaret had just placed her suitcase in the trunk of the waiting car when she heard the front door open behind her. "Were you going to leave without saying goodbye?" Martin's voice in the darkness made her freeze, hand still on the open trunk lid. She hadn't expected him to discover her departure until morning. Had counted on the cover of night to make her escape cleaner, less painful. "I left notes," she said without turning, unable to face him. "For you and Lily." "Notes," he repeated, the word hollow with disbelief. "After everything, you were going to disappear with nothing but notes." Margaret closed the trunk and finally turned to face him. Martin stood on the driveway in the clothes he'd worn earlier, his expression a mixture of anger and hurt that made her chest ache. "It's better this way," she insisted. "Cleaner." "For whom?" he challenged, moving closer. "Not for Lily, who will wake up tomorrow to find another person she loves has vanished from her life. Not for me." He paused, his voice dropping. "Is it better for you, Margaret? Is running away easier than facing what's happening between us?" "Nothing is happening between us," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Nothing can happen. I'm Claire's sister. And I'm Claire's husband," Martin acknowledged. "Or I was. Does that mean neither of us gets to move forward? To find happiness again?" "Not together," Margaret said, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill, or perhaps against the pull she felt toward him even now. "I'm betraying my sister every time I look at you and feel what I feel." Martin stepped closer, close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. "And I'm betraying Claire every time I forget to feel guilty about wanting you," he admitted. "But at some point we have to ask ourselves what Claire would actually want for us, for Lily. She would want us to honor her memory," Margaret insisted. "By being miserable. By denying ourselves connection." Martin shook his head. "The Claire I knew would want her daughter to be happy, her husband to find love again, her sister to have the family she always wanted." "You don't know that," Margaret whispered, though doubt had begun to creep into her certainty. "I knew my wife," Martin said quietly. "Just as you knew your sister. Claire wasn't perfect. She was human, with human desires and fears and hopes. She wouldn't want us frozen in grief forever." Margaret felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. "It hasn't even been 3 years. And in those 3 years I've been half alive at best," Martin replied. "Until you came. You brought life back into this house, Margaret. Into Lily. Into me." He reached for her hand, and despite her resolve, she didn't pull away. His touch was warm, solid, anchoring her when she wanted to flee. "I'm not asking for promises," he continued. "I'm just asking you not to run away. Not to make decisions based on guilt or what you think others expect. Give us a chance to figure this out together." The sincerity in his voice made her waver. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps there was a way forward that honored Claire's memory while allowing them to explore these feelings. Perhaps, Daddy. Margaret. The small voice from the doorway shattered the moment. Lily stood on the threshold in her pajamas, her expression confused as she took in the scene before her. Margaret's packed car, their tense postures, their joined hands. "Sweetheart, you should be in bed," Martin said, releasing Margaret's hand and moving toward his daughter. "You're leaving," Lily said to Margaret, her voice flat with certainty rather than question. "Like Mommy." "No, honey, not like that," Margaret hurried to explain. "I was just going to my apartment for a while. I left you a note." "You promised," Lily interrupted, her voice rising with accusation. "You promised you wouldn't leave me." Before either adult could respond, Lily turned and ran, not back into the house, but down the driveway toward the private beach path that led to the water. "Lily!" Martin called, immediately giving chase. Margaret dismissed the waiting driver and followed, her heart pounding with fear. The beach path was dark, illuminated only by occasional landscape lighting, and led directly to the shoreline where Claire had launched her boat that final day. By the time they reached the beach, Lily had a significant head start. The night was overcast, the moon obscured by gathering clouds that promised a storm. In the distance, lightning flickered over the water. "Lily!" Margaret called, scanning the darkened beach desperately. "Lily, please come back." "She's heading for the dock," Martin said grimly, pointing to a small figure silhouetted against the water. "Where Claire's accident happened." They ran across the sand, calling Lily's name, but the rising wind seemed to snatch their voices away. The private dock extended 30 yards into the water, ending at a small covered boat slip now empty of vessels. Lily stood at the very end, her small form dangerously close to the edge as waves began to crash against the pilings. "Stay back," Martin warned as they reached the dock's entrance. "Let me go slowly. If we both approach, she might panic." Margaret nodded, her throat tight with fear as she watched Martin walk carefully along the wooden planks, speaking in a calm, steady voice to his daughter. "Lily, sweetheart, please come away from the edge. The water isn't safe right now." "Mommy's boat was here," Lily said, her voice eerily calm. "She said she'd come back too." The simple statement revealed the depth of the child's trauma, the connection she'd made between Margaret's attempted departure and her mother's final journey. "I know, baby," Martin said, inching closer. "But what happened to Mommy was an accident. Margaret wasn't leaving forever." "Everyone leaves," Lily insisted, taking a step closer to the edge as a larger wave crashed against the dock, sending spray over the planks. "First Mommy, then all the nannies, now Margaret." "I'm right here, Lily," Margaret called, unable to remain silent any longer. "I'm not leaving you. I promise." As she spoke, a massive wave surged against the dock, the force of it causing the entire structure to shudder. Lily lost her balance, teetering at the edge for one heart-stopping moment before falling into the churning water below. Martin didn't hesitate. He dove in after her, disappearing beneath the dark surface as Margaret screamed and ran down the dock. Seconds stretched into an eternity as she searched the water frantically, praying for a glimpse of either of them. Finally, Martin surfaced, Lily clutched against his chest. He swam powerfully toward the dock with one arm, fighting the current that threatened to pull them both out to sea. Margaret lay flat on the wooden planks, extending her arms as far as she could reach. "Give her to me," she shouted above the wind. Martin lifted Lily high enough for Margaret to grasp her under the arms and pull her onto the dock. The child was pale and unresponsive, her lips tinged blue. "She's not breathing," Margaret realized with horror, immediately turning Lily onto her side to clear her airway of water. Martin hauled himself onto the dock, his clothes sodden and heavy. "Start rescue breathing," he instructed, his voice calm despite the terror in his eyes as he began chest compressions. Together they worked in the perfect synchronization of shared desperation, Margaret breathing for Lily while Martin maintained the rhythm of compressions. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, Lily coughed violently, expelling water as she drew a shuddering breath. "Thank God," Martin whispered, gathering his daughter into his arms as she began to cry weakly. "It's okay, sweetheart. We've got you." Margaret called 911 as Martin carried Lily back to the house, both of them soaked and shivering in the increasingly cold wind. By the time the ambulance arrived, Lily was conscious but disoriented. Her breathing labored enough to concern the paramedics. "We need to take her in," the lead EMT advised. "Possible secondary drowning is a risk with submersion incidents." Martin nodded, never releasing his hold on Lily's hand. "I'm coming with her." "Me too," Margaret said immediately, then hesitated, looking to Martin for confirmation. "Of course," he said, the simple words bridging the gulf that had opened between them earlier. "We're going together." The hospital admitted Lily for overnight observation, her condition stable but requiring monitoring. She fell asleep shortly after being settled in a pediatric room, exhaustion claiming her after the trauma of the night. Margaret and Martin sat on opposite sides of her bed, the beeping monitors and institutional lighting creating a surreal backdrop to the emotional storm they'd weathered. "I almost lost her," Martin said quietly, his voice raw. "Just like Claire." "But you didn't," Margaret reminded him, reaching across the bed to touch his hand. "You saved her." "We saved her," he corrected. "I couldn't have done it alone." The simple acknowledgement hung between them. Neither could have saved Lily alone. Perhaps that was true of healing her as well, of raising her, of helping her grow into the person she was meant to become. "I'm sorry I tried to leave," Margaret said after a long silence. "I was scared." "Of what?" "Of everything I was feeling. For you. For Lily." She met his eyes across the sleeping child. "For the life I could see with both of you." Before Martin could respond, the hospital room door opened, revealing Richard and Eleanor Reynolds, their expressions a mixture of concern and accusation. "What happened?" Eleanor demanded, rushing to Lily's bedside. "The hospital called us as next of kin. She fell into the water from our dock," Martin explained, his voice carefully neutral. "She's going to be fine." Richard's gaze moved from his granddaughter to Martin, then to Margaret. "This is exactly what we were afraid of," he said coldly. "Negligence. A child nearly drowning on your property." "It wasn't negligence," Margaret defended immediately. "It was an accident. Martin saved her life." "After putting it at risk," Eleanor countered. "Just like he did with Claire." The accusation hung in the air, poisonous and familiar. Margaret saw Martin flinch slightly, the barb finding its mark despite his outward composure. "That's enough," she said firmly. "This isn't the time or place for your vendetta against Martin. Our attorney will be contacting you in the morning," Richard informed Martin, ignoring Margaret completely. "This incident only strengthens our case for custody." "You can't be serious," Margaret protested. "You would use this accident to take Lily away from her father." "We're protecting our granddaughter," Eleanor insisted. "From a man who clearly can't keep her safe." "The man who dove into dangerous waters to save her," Margaret corrected, her voice rising despite her effort to remain calm. "The man who performed CPR while I called 911. The man who hasn't left her side for a moment since." Her parents exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her vehement defense. "Margaret," her mother said in the tone she'd always used when disappointed, "I understand you've developed attachments during your time here, but you need to think clearly about what's best for Lily." "I am thinking clearly," Margaret replied. "For the first time in years, maybe. Lily belongs with her father. She's healing, she's speaking again, she's starting to process her grief in healthy ways. Taking her away now would devastate her." "We'll let the courts decide that," Richard said dismissively. "In the meantime, we expect you to come home with us immediately. Your involvement in this situation has become inappropriate." The ultimatum was clear. Choose sides. Her parents or Martin and Lily. The family she was born into or the family she had found. "I'm staying," Margaret said, the decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. "Lily needs me." "And what about what Claire would want?" Eleanor demanded. Have you considered that at all? Your own sister. Before Margaret could respond, a nurse entered with a tablet. Excuse me, Mr. Sullivan. We need your signature on some additional forms, and Dr. Patel would like to speak with you about Lily's treatment plan. Martin hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave the room with the Reynolds present. Go, Margaret encouraged. I'll stay with Lily. After Martin left with the nurse, Eleanor turned on Margaret with renewed intensity. What is going on between you and Martin Sullivan? We're taking care of Lily together, Margaret answered carefully. Don't insult our intelligence, Richard scoffed. We saw how you look at each other. Claire has been gone less than 3 years, and already you're moving in on her husband. The accusation stung, but Margaret refused to be shamed. I came here for Lily, she said truthfully. Everything else happened. I didn't plan it or seek it out. So you admit it, Eleanor said, her voice cold with disgust. You're involved with your sister's husband. It's complicated, Margaret acknowledged. But my feelings for Martin don't change the fact that Lily belongs with him. He's a good father who made one mistake, letting Lily see us arguing. That's hardly grounds for losing custody. One mistake, Richard repeated incredulously. The man has a pattern of negligence that cost Claire her life and nearly cost Lily hers tonight. That's not true, a small voice interrupted from the bed. All 3 adults turned in surprise to find Lily awake, her eyes clear and focused despite her ordeal. Lily, sweetheart, Eleanor began, her tone instantly softening. You should be resting. Daddy didn't hurt Mommy, Lily continued, ignoring her grandmother's concern. I was there. I saw. The simple statement silenced the room. Margaret realized with a jolt that this was the first time she'd heard Lily speak directly about the accident. What do you mean, honey? She asked gently, taking Lily's hand. Lily's gaze remained fixed on her grandparents. Mommy wanted to take the boat alone. Daddy said no, it wasn't safe. They argued. Her voice was small but certain. Mommy went anyway when Daddy was on the phone. She took me because I begged to go. Eleanor sank into a chair, the color draining from her face. Claire took the boat against Martin's advice. Lily nodded. The water got scary. Mommy tried to turn back, but the big wave came. Her voice faltered. She told me to hold on tight. She put her life jacket on me instead of her. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face as the truth of Claire's final moments emerged from the one witness no one had truly listened to. Claire hadn't been reckless. She'd been a mother protecting her child with her final act. Why didn't you tell us this before? Richard asked, his certainty visibly shaken. Nobody asked me, Lily said simply. And Daddy said not to talk about it because it made everyone sad. The door opened as Martin returned, stopping abruptly when he sensed the changed atmosphere in the room. His eyes went immediately to Lily, then to Margaret's tear-streaked face. What happened? He asked, moving quickly to Lily's side. I told them about Mommy, Lily said, reaching for his hand. About the boat. Understanding dawned in Martin's expression, followed by a flash of pain quickly suppressed for his daughter's sake. You didn't have to do that, sweetheart. Yes, I did, Lily insisted with surprising firmness. They were being mean to you. And to Margaret. Martin looked across at the Reynolds, who stood in uncharacteristic silence, their righteous certainty visibly crumbling in the face of Lily's testimony. Perhaps, Eleanor said finally, her voice unsteady, we should continue this conversation another time, when Lily is feeling better. Perhaps, Martin agreed, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful as they left the room. After they were gone, he turned to Margaret. What exactly did Lily tell them? The truth about the accident, Margaret said quietly. That Claire took the boat against your advice. That she gave Lily her life jacket. Martin closed his eyes briefly, the pain of those memories evident in every line of his face. When he opened them again, he looked at his daughter with gentle concern. Are you okay, Lilybug? Talking about that day is hard. Lily nodded solemnly. I didn't want Grandma and Grandpa to take me away from you. Or from Margaret. The simple statement encompassed so much. Lily's awareness of the adult's conflict, her fear of losing her father, her attachment to Margaret. It was a child's expression of what truly mattered. Family, however unconventional. No one is taking you anywhere, Martin assured her, brushing her damp hair back from her forehead. And Margaret isn't going anywhere either. Right, Margaret. The question contained multitudes. A request, a hope, a future hanging in the balance. Margaret looked at the two of them, this father and daughter who had somehow become the center of her world in just a few short weeks. Right, she confirmed, her earlier doubts dissolving in the face of this simple truth. They belonged together, all three of them. I'm staying. Lily's eyes drifted closed, reassured by this promise. Within moments, she was asleep again, her breathing deep and regular, the monitors showing stable vital signs. We should let her rest, Martin said softly, standing and gesturing toward the small waiting area visible through the room's window. We need to talk. In the quiet privacy of the empty waiting room, Margaret found herself suddenly nervous. The crisis had forced them to present a united front, but the fundamental questions remained unanswered between them. I meant what I said in there, she began before Martin could speak. I want to stay. For Lily. Just for Lily? Martin asked, his gaze steady on her face. Margaret took a deep breath. No, she admitted. Not just for Lily. Martin moved closer, taking her hands in his. I need you to be sure, Margaret. Because if we do this, if we try to build something together, it won't be easy. Your parents, Claire's friends, the whole community. There will be judgment, gossip, accusations. I know, she acknowledged. But I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people might think or say. I want to make choices based on what feels right, what brings healing instead of more pain. And this feels right to you? Martin asked, his voice low with vulnerability she'd rarely heard from him. Us. Margaret considered the question seriously, searching her heart for any lingering doubt or guilt. She found concern about the challenges ahead, awareness of the complications their relationship would create. But beneath that, a certainty that had been growing since the first moment she'd seen Martin with Lily in the garden. Yes, she said simply. It feels right. Not perfect, not easy, but right. The smile that transformed Martin's face was worth every doubt she'd overcome to reach this moment. He drew her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that spoke of both passion and reverence. I never expected to find you, he murmured against her hair. To feel this way again. Neither did I, Margaret admitted, allowing herself to relax into his embrace. I came here for Lily, not looking for this. And yet here we are, Martin said, drawing back slightly to look into her eyes. So what happens now? Before Margaret could answer, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Sullivan, your daughter is asking for both of you. They returned to Lily's room hand in hand, no longer hiding the connection between them. The child observed their joined hands with sleepy satisfaction. Are you going to be my new mommy now? She asked Margaret directly, the question both innocent and profound. Margaret sat carefully on the edge of the bed. No one could ever replace your mommy, she said gently. Claire will always be your mother, and will always keep her memory alive. But, Martin added, sitting on Lily's other side, Margaret and I care about each other very much, and we both love you. So we're going to be a family. A different kind of family than before, but still a family. Lily considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Like in my book, where the daddy finds a new love. Something like that, Margaret agreed, wondering what children's book had prepared Lily for this conversation better than any adult could have. Good, Lily decided, her eyelids growing heavy again. Mommy would like that. As she drifted back to sleep, Margaret and Martin exchanged glances over her bed, surprised by her certainty, touched by her acceptance, and curious about this book she'd mentioned. The answer came the following morning when Mrs. Alvarez arrived with a change of clothes for all of them and Lily's favorite stuffed animal. Along with these essentials, she brought a sealed envelope. "This was with Miss Claire's things," she explained, handing it to Margaret. "I found it when I was organizing the storage closet last week, but forgot to give it to you with everything that's been happening." The envelope bore Margaret's name in Claire's handwriting, with a simple instruction beneath: "To be opened if anything happens to me." With trembling fingers, Margaret broke the seal, unfolding several pages of her sister's precise handwriting. As she read, tears filled her eyes. Not tears of grief this time, but of understanding and, strangely, relief. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and I'm no longer there to take care of the two people I love most in this world, Martin and Lily. I'm writing this while watching you play with Lily during your last visit. You're so natural with her, so full of the warmth and spontaneity I've always envied in you. Yes, envied, though I never told you that. You've always thought I was the successful sister, the one who had everything figured out. The truth is, I've often wished I could approach life with your openness, your ability to find joy in small moments instead of always planning for the next achievement. Martin needs that quality in his life. He works too hard, takes everything too seriously, much like me, and sometimes forgets to live in the present. Lily needs it too, a balance to the structure and discipline that Martin and I have created in our home. I'm not trying to plan from beyond the grave. That would be very me, wouldn't it? But I want you to know that if something happens to me, I would want you in their lives. Not just as an aunt who visits occasionally, but as a constant presence. Someone who can remind Martin how to laugh, who can show Lily that it's okay to make mistakes, who can bring warmth back into a home that might grow cold without me. And if that presence becomes something more between you and Martin someday, please know that you have my blessing. I mean that sincerely. The thought of the two people I love most finding comfort and joy with each other doesn't hurt me, it gives me peace. I know our parents will struggle with this idea. They've always had fixed notions about how life should unfold, about loyalty and propriety. But real loyalty isn't about preserving the past in amber. It's about helping those we love find happiness, even when that path looks different than expected. Take care of my two loves if anything happens to me, Margaret. Not because you owe me or because it's your duty, but because I believe you could find as much happiness with them as they would find with you. All my love, Claire." Margaret looked up from the letter to find Martin watching her, concern evident in his expression. "What is it?" he asked gently. Wordlessly, she handed him the pages, watching as he read his late wife's final message to her sister. When he finished, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She knew," he said softly. "Somehow she knew what might happen. Not the accident," Margaret clarified. "But she knew us, both of us, well enough to see possibilities we couldn't see ourselves." Martin reached across Lily's sleeping form to take Margaret's hand. "Does this change things for you?" Margaret considered the question, the letter's contents settling into her heart like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their proper places. The guilt that had plagued her, the sense of betraying Claire's memory. Claire herself had anticipated and absolved those feelings years before they'd even formed. "Yes," she admitted. "It changes everything and nothing. I already knew I wanted to stay, to be with you and Lily. But now I can do it without feeling like I'm betraying Claire." "A gift," Martin said, looking down at the letter again. "Her final gift to all of us." Later that day, as Lily's discharge was being processed, Richard and Eleanor Reynolds returned to the hospital. Their demeanor was markedly different from the previous night. Subdued, uncertain, the righteous anger replaced by something closer to confusion. "We've been thinking," Richard began awkwardly, "about what Lily told us. About Claire. And," Martin prompted, his tone neutral but not hostile. "We may have been hasty in our judgments," Eleanor admitted, the words clearly difficult for her. "If Claire took the boat against your advice, it doesn't change the fact that she's gone," Martin said quietly. "Or that we all miss her terribly." "No," Richard agreed. "But it does change how we move forward." He glanced at Margaret, Then back to Martin. "We won't be pursuing custody. Lily belongs with her father." The concession, so long in coming, seemed to deflate them both, as if the anger that had sustained them through their grief had finally exhausted itself, leaving only the raw pain of loss. "Thank you," Martin said simply. Eleanor turned to Margaret, her expression complicated. "And you? What are your plans now?" Margaret exchanged glances with Martin before answering. "I'm staying," she said. "With Martin and Lily." Understanding dawned in her mother's eyes, followed by a flash of the old disapproval. "So soon after Claire?" "Mom," Margaret said gently, "I have something you should read." She handed her Claire's letter, watching as both parents bent their heads to read their elder daughter's words. When they finished, Eleanor's hands were trembling slightly. "This sounds like Claire," she admitted. "Always planning for every contingency. Always thinking of others," Margaret added. "Even in her final instructions." Richard looked between Martin and Margaret, his expression softening slightly. She was very clear about her wishes. "Yes," Margaret agreed. She was. A silence fell between them, not comfortable, not yet, but no longer charged with accusation and defense. It was a beginning, a small crack in the wall of grief and blame that had separated them for 3 years. "Perhaps," Eleanor said finally, "we could visit Lily sometimes, if that would be acceptable." "Of course," Martin replied. "She needs her grandparents in her life." As they left, Margaret felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, not completely gone but lighter than before. The road ahead would not be easy, but they had taken the first steps toward healing not just themselves but the extended family that surrounded them. That evening, as they settled Lily back into her own bed at home, she asked for a specific book from her shelf, The Garden Family, a children's story Margaret didn't recognize. "Mommy gave me this," Lily explained as Margaret opened it, "for my birthday before she went away." The book told the story of a father and daughter who tended a garden after losing the mother of their family. Eventually, a new woman came into their lives, not replacing the mother but creating something new, helping the garden grow in different ways. The final illustration showed all 4 of them together, the father, daughter, new mother, and the spirit of the first mother watching over them from the sky. "Is this the book you were talking about?" Margaret asked, understanding dawning. "About Daddy finding a new love?" Lily nodded. "Mommy said sometimes gardens need new gardeners, but they're still the same garden." Margaret looked up to find Martin watching from the doorway, his expression a mixture of wonder and peace. In that moment, she understood that Claire had prepared them all for this possibility, had given her blessing in ways both direct and subtle, ensuring that those she loved would find their way back to happiness. Later, as Lily slept peacefully, Margaret and Martin stood together in Claire's garden, now restored to its former beauty under Margaret's care. The moon illuminated the flowers in silver light, creating a magical quality to the space that had become the heart of their healing. "I never expected this," Martin said, his arm around Margaret's waist. "To find love again, to feel joy without guilt." "Claire knew," Margaret replied, leaning into his embrace. "She understood what we would need before we did. She was always 3 steps ahead," Martin agreed with fond remembrance. "But even she couldn't have predicted exactly how it would happen. You coming here, changing everything." "Not changing," Margaret corrected gently. "Continuing, building on the foundation she created. Like the garden." Martin turned to face her fully, framing her face with his hands. "I love you, Margaret Reynolds," he said simply. "Not because you remind me of Claire or because you're different from her, but because you're you, exactly who you are." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling right, feeling true in a way nothing else had in her life. "And I love Lily. And I will always honor Claire's memory, her place in our lives." As their lips met in the garden Claire had created, Margaret felt a sense of rightness, of coming home to a place she hadn't known she was seeking. This wasn't an ending or a betrayal. It was a continuation, a new chapter in a story that had room for all of them, even those who lived now only in memory. Some promises once made change everything. And some hearts, once touched, find their way to exactly where they're meant to be, even along the most unexpected paths. 3 weeks after Margaret left the Sullivan estate, she sat in her small San Francisco apartment staring at her phone. Lily's smiling face filled the screen, a photo taken during their sailing trip, before everything had fallen apart and come together in equal measure. Despite Claire's letter and the tentative acceptance from her parents, Margaret had ultimately decided to return to California. Not permanently, she'd promised Lily that, but to tie up loose ends and give everyone space to adjust. The real reason was more complicated. She needed to be certain that what she felt for Martin wasn't just the intensity of their shared crisis, that their connection would survive ordinary life. "Distance creates clarity," she'd told Martin the night before her departure. "If what we feel is real, a few weeks apart won't change it." He disagreed but respected her decision, driving her to the airport himself while Lily clung to her with tearful promises to water the garden every day until she returned. Now, 3 weeks had stretched into 4, and Margaret found herself caught in a limbo of her own making. Daily video calls with Lily had become the highlight of her existence. Martin joined occasionally, their conversations careful and restrained, both avoiding the topic of when, or if, she would return. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Sophia. "Dinner tonight? You can't keep hiding in your apartment forever." Margaret sighed, typing back a non-committal response. The truth was, she didn't want to reintegrate into her San Francisco life. Everything here felt temporary, insubstantial compared to the connections she'd formed in Miami. Her phone rang, Lily's daily call, right on schedule. "Hi, sweetheart," Margaret answered, forcing brightness into her voice. "Hi, Margaret." Lily's face appeared, closer to the camera than necessary as always. "Guess what? I got a gold star on my ocean painting." "That's wonderful. Is it hanging on the refrigerator?" "Daddy put it in a real frame," Lily reported proudly. "In his office. He says it reminds him of our boat trip." The mention of Martin sent a familiar ache through Margaret's chest. "That's perfect. How is your dad?" Lily's expression clouded slightly. "Working a lot. But he reads me 2 stories every night now, not just 1. Progress, Margaret thought. Small but significant. "And the garden? Mrs. Alvarez helps me water it," Lily said. "But it misses you. Daddy says plants can tell when people they love are gone." The innocent comment struck Margaret with unexpected force. Was that what she was doing, withholding love out of fear? Before she could respond, Lily continued. "When are you coming home, Margaret? You said soon, but it's been forever." Such a simple word, yet so loaded with meaning. Miami had become home in a way San Francisco never had, not because of the place itself, but because of the people waiting for her there. "I'm still figuring things out, sweetheart," Margaret answered honestly. "Adult stuff is complicated sometimes." "Is it because you're scared?" Lily asked with her characteristic directness. Margaret blinked in surprise. "What makes you think I'm scared?" "Daddy says people sometimes run away from good things because they're afraid they don't deserve them," Lily explained matter-of-factly. "He said that might be why you left." The insight, Martin's insight, filtered through a child's understanding, hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Was that what she was doing? Running from happiness because some part of her didn't believe she deserved it? "Your dad is pretty smart," Margaret acknowledged. "He misses you," Lily confided. "He looks at your picture a lot when he thinks I'm not watching." Before Margaret could process this revelation, Lily was called away by Mrs. Alvarez for dinner. Their goodbye was hurried, leaving Margaret alone with thoughts she'd been avoiding for weeks. Meanwhile in Miami, Martin sat in his home office, staring at the quarterly reports that should have commanded his full attention. Instead, his mind kept drifting to Margaret, her smile, her laugh, the way she'd brought life back into their home with such effortless grace. He'd respected her need for space, limited his communication to brief updates during Lily's calls, resisted the urge to fly to California and ask her to come home. But with each passing day, Her absence felt less like a temporary separation and more like a slow-motion ending to something that had barely begun. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting Mrs. Alvarez with coffee. Instead, Lily entered, clutching a drawing in her hands. "I made something for you, Daddy." Martin set aside his work immediately, a change from the pre-Margaret days when he might have asked Lily to wait until he finished. "Let me see, sweetheart." Lily placed the drawing on his desk with ceremonial care. It showed 3 figures standing in front of their house: a tall man with dark hair, a small blonde girl, and a woman with auburn hair. Above them, a yellow sun had a face that looked remarkably like Claire, smiling down on the trio. "It's our family," Lily explained unnecessarily. "You and me and Margaret. And Mommy watching from heaven." Martin studied the drawing, his throat tight with emotion. "It's beautiful, Lily. Can we send it to Margaret, so she remembers she belongs with us?" The simple question contained such certainty. Of course Margaret belonged with them. In Lily's mind, it was an established fact, not the complicated emotional tangle adults had made it. "Yes," Martin agreed. "We'll send it to her." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like to deliver it in person instead?" Lily's eyes widened. "We're going to California." "I think it's time," Martin said, the decision crystallizing as he spoke. "We've given Margaret enough space. Now we need to show her what she means to us." That evening, after settling Lily with Mrs. Alvarez, Martin drove to Vanessa Hughes' waterfront condo. Their last interaction had been tense, but if anyone could help him understand Claire's mindset in those final months, it was her closest friend. Vanessa seemed unsurprised by his visit. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, leading him to her balcony overlooking the same bay where Claire's accident had occurred. "You want to talk about Margaret?" "Partly," Martin acknowledged. "But mostly about Claire. There are things that don't add up about the accident. Things Lily has said, things I've remembered." Vanessa sighed, looking out at the darkening water. "I promised Claire I wouldn't tell you unless you asked directly." She turned to face him. "What exactly do you want to know? Was Claire sick?" The question had been forming in his mind for weeks, pieces falling into place. Claire's increased doctor visits in the months before her death, her sudden interest in creating memory books for Lily, the letters she'd written for future milestones. Vanessa's expression confirmed his suspicion before she spoke. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She found out 3 months before the accident. The confirmation hit Martin like a physical blow. "Why didn't she tell me?" "She was going to," Vanessa said gently. She'd made an appointment with a specialist to discuss treatment options, though they weren't optimistic. The prognosis was difficult. 6 months, maybe less. "And the accident?" Martin asked, already suspecting the answer. "I don't know for certain," Vanessa admitted. Claire was always in control, always planning. The idea of a slow decline, of Lily watching her waste away. She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging between them. "She chose her ending," Martin concluded, the realization bringing not anger but a profound sadness, and strangely understanding. It was exactly the kind of decision Claire would make. Clean, definitive, on her own terms. "There's something else you should know," Vanessa continued. After her diagnosis, Claire talked a lot about Margaret, about wanting her to be part of your lives, especially Lily's. She worried about you both being alone. She mentioned that in her letter to Margaret, Martin said. Vanessa nodded. She loved her sister deeply, though they were so different. She used to say Margaret knew how to live in a way she never mastered, present in the moment, open to joy without planning it to death. She met Martin's eyes directly. "Claire would want you both to be happy, Martin. She was practical that way." "I know," Martin said quietly. "I just needed to be sure." As he drove home, Claire's final choices became clearer to him. Not just the accident itself, but the preparations she'd made beforehand. The letters for Lily. The garden she'd created knowing she wouldn't see it mature. The subtle suggestions about Margaret visiting more often. Claire had been preparing them all for a future she wouldn't share, trying in her methodical way to ensure her family would find happiness again after she was gone. By the time he reached home, Martin had made his decision. He wouldn't wait for Margaret to decide when or if to return. Some things were too important to leave to chance or fear or misplaced guilt. That night, he booked 3 tickets to San Francisco. "Are we going on vacation?" Lily asked the next morning when he told her to pack her favorite clothes. "Not exactly," Martin explained, helping her select outfits. "We're going to bring Margaret home." Lily considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "What if she doesn't want to come?" "Then we'll respect her decision," Martin said honestly. "But I think she does want to come home. She just needs to be sure it's the right thing for everyone." "It is," Lily stated with absolute certainty. "We're not a whole family without her." Out of the mouths of babes, Martin thought. The simple truth that adults complicated with doubt and fear and overthinking. They weren't whole without Margaret. As their flight took off the following afternoon, Martin found himself more nervous than he'd been before any business deal or presentation. He was risking more than rejection. He was risking the fragile peace they'd established, the careful distance that protected them all from potential pain. But some risks were worth taking. Some loves were worth fighting for. And the family they could build together, honoring Claire's memory while creating something new and beautiful, was worth every uncertainty. San Francisco greeted them with characteristic fog and a chill that made Lily burrow deeper into her Miami weight jacket. They checked into their hotel, freshened up, and took a taxi to the address Margaret had shared for her video calls with Lily. Standing outside her apartment building, Martin felt a moment of doubt. Was this too much? Too dramatic? Should he have called first? "Daddy," Lily said, tugging his hand. "We have to ring the bell." Taking a deep breath, Martin pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. "Hello." Margaret's voice came through the intercom, slightly distorted but unmistakably hers. "It's us," Martin said simply. "Lily and me." A long pause followed, then the door buzzed open. They found Margaret waiting in her doorway, her expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that looked remarkably like hope. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, yet Martin thought she had never looked more beautiful. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her eyes moving from Martin to Lily and back again. Before Martin could answer, Lily broke free from his hand and ran to Margaret, wrapping her arms around her waist. "We came to take you home," she announced. "We miss you too much." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she knelt to embrace Lily properly. "I've missed you too, sweetheart. So much." Over Lily's head, her gaze met Martin's, questioning and vulnerable. He stepped forward, his heart in his throat. "Lily's right," he said quietly. "We're here to bring you home, if that's what you want. These weeks without you have been empty. The house doesn't feel right. We don't feel right." "I needed time," Margaret began, standing but keeping one arm around Lily. "To be sure that what I was feeling wasn't just the crisis, the moment." Martin finished for her. "I know. But some things become clearer with distance, not cloudier. At least they have for me." "For me too," Margaret admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I brought you something," Lily interrupted, pulling her drawing from her small backpack. "It's our family." Margaret accepted the drawing, her eyes filling with fresh tears as she took in the 4 figures, 3 on earth, 1 watching from above. "It's perfect, Lily," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Claire would want this," Martin said softly. "Us together." She tried to tell us both in her own way. "I know," Margaret nodded. "I've read her letter so many times these past weeks. But it wasn't about Claire's permission. It was about being sure of my own heart. Of what I truly want." "And what do you want, Margaret?" Martin asked, taking a step closer. She looked up at him, all the doubt and fear of the past weeks giving way to certainty. "To come home," she said simply. "To you and Lily. To the life we're building together." Martin closed the remaining distance between them, taking her face in his hands with exquisite tenderness. "Then come home," he whispered. "Today. Now." "I have things to pack," she protested weakly, even as she leaned into his touch. "We'll help," Lily offered, already exploring the small apartment with curious eyes. "Is this all your stuff?" "It's not very much." Margaret laughed through her tears. "No, it's not much. I've never been good at putting down roots." "Until now," Martin said, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Until us." When he finally kissed her, it felt like coming home, for both of them. A homecoming that had been written in Claire's garden, in Lily's drawings, in letters penned by a woman who had loved them enough to want their happiness even in her absence. Later, as they packed Margaret's belongings, indeed not many for a woman in her late 20s, Lily discovered a half-finished painting on an easel in the corner. "What's this?" she asked, studying the canvas with interest. Margaret looked up from the box she was filling. "Something I started after I came back. It helped me think." The painting showed Claire's garden in full bloom, with 3 figures tending the flowers together. Clearly Martin, Lily, and Margaret. Above them, sunlight filtered through the trees in a pattern that subtly suggested a 4th presence watching over them. "It's beautiful," Martin said, coming to stand beside her. "You never told me you painted." "There's a lot we still have to learn about each other," Margaret replied with a small smile. "We have time for that now." "All the time in the world," Martin agreed, his arm slipping around her waist in a gesture that already felt familiar and right. As they loaded the last of Margaret's belongings into the taxi, she took one final look at the apartment that had never really been home. She felt no regret, no uncertainty, only anticipation for the life waiting for them in Miami. A life that honored the past while embracing the future. A family built on love that transcended conventional boundaries. A garden where new growth flourished alongside cherished memories. Some promises changed everything. And some hearts found their way home along the most unexpected paths. 6 months later, Margaret stood at the whiteboard in her 3rd grade classroom at Westridge Elementary School in San Francisco, explaining the water cycle to 25 restless children counting down the minutes until Friday afternoon freedom. She'd accepted the position 3 weeks after returning from Miami, convincing herself it was the responsible choice. A stable job with benefits, doing work she'd trained for. "When water evaporates from the ocean," she explained, drawing arrows on the diagram, "it rises into the atmosphere and forms clouds." Several children called out. "That's right," Margaret smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. "And when the clouds get heavy with water, we get rain," the class chorused. "Excellent," Margaret nodded, glancing at the clock. 10 more minutes until dismissal. 10 more minutes until another weekend alone in her apartment, video calling Lily and Martin, pretending this separation was working for any of them. The decision to return to California had seemed logical at the time. Her parents were making efforts to accept her relationship with Martin, but the process was fragile. Taking a teaching position in San Francisco had been a compromise. Staying connected to her family while giving everyone time to adjust to the new reality. In practice, it had been 3 months of heartache disguised as practicality. "Ms. Reynolds." A small hand raised at the back of the classroom. "Yes, Tyler. There's people at the door." Margaret turned toward the classroom entrance, her heart stopping at the sight of 2 familiar figures standing in the doorway. One tall with dark hair threaded with silver, one small with blonde pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. "Martin." "Lily," she whispered, wondering if she'd conjured them from sheer longing. "Margaret." Lily broke free from her father's hand and raced across the classroom, launching herself into Margaret's arms with such force that she staggered backward against the whiteboard. "What are you doing here?" Margaret asked, holding Lily tightly while looking over her head at Martin, who remained in the doorway, his expression a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "Surprising you," Lily announced, pulling back to beam up at her. "Daddy said we couldn't wait anymore." The classroom had erupted into excited whispers, 25 children suddenly witnessing a real-life romantic moment more interesting than any water cycle. Class, Margaret said, finding her teacher voice despite her racing heart. This is a special visitor, Lily, and her father, Mr. Sullivan. Is she your daughter? One girl asked innocently. Before Margaret could formulate a response, Lily answered proudly. She's going to be my new mom. We just have to convince her to come home first. The classroom erupted in delighted gasps and giggles. Margaret felt heat rush to her cheeks as she glanced at the clock. 5 minutes to dismissal. Why don't you all start packing up early today? She suggested, earning cheers from her students. And remember your science journals for Monday. As the children gathered their belongings amid excited chatter, Martin finally approached, stopping a respectful distance from her desk. I'm sorry to interrupt your class, he said, though his eyes suggested he wasn't sorry at all. But this couldn't wait any longer. What couldn't? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Us, Martin said simply. This separation's not working, Margaret. Not for me, not for Lily, and I suspect not for you either. The last student filed out as the dismissal bell rang, leaving the three of them alone in the suddenly quiet classroom. I have responsibilities here, Margaret began, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. My contract can be broken, Martin finished gently. Schools need teachers in Miami too. My parents. I met with them last weekend, Martin interrupted, surprising her. Showed them Claire's letter. It wasn't easy, but we've reached an understanding. They want to be part of Lily's life, which means accepting us. All of us, as a family. Margaret's eyes widened. You went to see my parents. Without telling me. I needed to remove every obstacle, Martin explained. Every reason you might give for staying away from us. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes. Because the truth is, Margaret, we're not whole without you. We tried. It doesn't work. Daddy cries sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping, Lily added helpfully, still clinging to Margaret's hand. And he looks at your picture a lot. Martin winced slightly at this revelation. Thank you for that, sweetheart. You're welcome, Lily replied cheerfully, clearly pleased to be helping. Despite everything, Margaret found herself smiling. Her first genuine smile in weeks. I've missed you both so much, she admitted. Every day. Then come home, Martin said, taking her free hand in his. For good this time. But what about? No more buts, Martin interrupted gently. Claire didn't want us to stop living. She sent you to us, Margaret, maybe not literally, but in every way that matters. She knew what we would need before we did. I have something for you, Lily announced, reaching into her small backpack and pulling out a folded piece of paper. I made it myself. Margaret accepted the drawing with trembling hands. It showed the three of them standing in front of their Miami home, but with a new addition. A small diamond ring on the hand of the figure representing Margaret. Oh, she breathed, looking up at Martin with wide eyes. He reached into his pocket and withdrew not a jewelry box, but another folded paper. I have something for you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not a ring, not yet unless you want one. But something more important. The paper contained a deed to Claire's garden, officially renamed the Claire Sullivan Memorial Garden, and registered as a small private park. We're not replacing Claire, Martin said softly. We're honoring her by becoming the family she wanted us to be. Different from before, but no less real, no less valuable. The lawyer said we needed your signature too, Lily explained, pointing to a blank line at the bottom of the document. Because you're going to be part of our family. Margaret looked between them, this man and child who had somehow become the center of her world, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. I've been so afraid, she confessed. Afraid of what people would think, afraid of betraying Claire's memory, afraid of how much I love you both. Love doesn't divide, Martin said, echoing words Claire had written in her final letter. It multiplies. Yes, Margaret agreed, certainty filling her heart. Yes to coming home. Yes to the garden. Yes to us. Martin's smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that held both passion and promise. Lily wrapped her arms around both their legs, creating a three-person embrace that felt perfectly, wonderfully right. "Does this mean I can tell my class you're my mom now?" Lily asked when they finally separated. Margaret knelt to Lily's level, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "It means I'm going to love you as if you were my own," she said carefully. "But your mom will always be your mom. I'll be your Margaret, just like you've always said." Lily considered this, then nodded solemnly. "But other people can call you my mom if they want to?" Margaret glanced up at Martin, who nodded encouragingly. "If that feels right to you, then yes," she agreed. "Good," Lily decided. "Because I already told everyone at my school." 2 weeks later, they stood together in Claire's garden, now officially the Claire Sullivan Memorial Garden, for a small private ceremony. Margaret had resigned her teaching position, packed her belongings once again, this time for good, and moved back into the Miami house that now truly felt like home. The garden had flourished under their combined care, bursting with the vibrant colors and scents of early summer. At its center, they had installed a beautiful teak bench with a simple bronze plaque. "Claire Sullivan, beloved mother, wife, sister. Her love continues to grow here." As Martin placed a ring on Margaret's finger, a sapphire rather than a diamond, deliberately different from the one Claire had worn, Lily stepped forward with a bouquet of flowers freshly cut from the garden. She placed them carefully on the bench before rejoining Martin and Margaret. "Mommy sent Aunt Margaret to love us," she said with the simple certainty of childhood. "And now we're a family again." "A different kind of family," Margaret agreed, squeezing Lily's hand. "But still a family. The kind Claire wanted for us," Martin added, his arm around Margaret's waist. "One built on love that honors the past while embracing the future." As they stood together in the garden Claire had created, Margaret felt a sense of peace she'd never known before, a certainty that this unexpected path had always been waiting for her, for all of them. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a new creation, beautiful in its own right. Some promises changed everything, and some hearts found their way home along the most unexpected paths, guided perhaps by those who loved them enough to want their happiness even in absence. In Claire's garden, surrounded by the beauty she had planted, a new family bloomed. Different, unexpected, but no less precious for the journey that had brought them together. Oh my precious hearts, wasn't that just the most beautiful ending? I'm sitting here with tears of joy in my eyes. If this story touched your soul like it touched mine, please shower that like button with some love and subscribe to our romance channel for more stories that will warm your heart. I would absolutely love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever found love in an unexpected place? Or had to choose between following your heart and what others thought was right? Your stories inspire me more than you know. Don't forget to join me this Friday for another heartwarming and interesting romance story that will take you on an emotional journey you won't want to miss. Remember, my beautiful souls, the most magical love stories often begin when we least expect them. Always take good care of your beautiful heart. With love.